Elon Musk may soon drop news that could turn an already dire situation into a nightmare for Boeing Starliner. Currently, 2 astronauts are stuck aboard the International Space Station, missing out on much-needed rest and time with loved ones. NASA's lack of confidence in the Starliner's safety keeps them from coming home. But what if Musk's revelation holds an even darker truth? As we explore the unfolding drama, one thing becomes clear: the Boeing Starliner astronauts are not with us anymore.
In August 2024, Elon Musk sent out a tweet that seemed like a subtle jab. He hinted that aircraft companies won't rule the space industry just like car makers don't run the aircraft business. Musk was clearly aiming at Boeing, the big aircraft company that also builds space systems. Musk's words didn't just come out of nowhere. They followed a string of events involving NASA. NASA revealed that astronauts Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore, who embarked on a journey aboard Boeing's Starliner, would be returning to Earth using a SpaceX vehicle instead. Initially, they launched into space on June 5, 2024, with plans to come back after approximately 8 days. However, unforeseen technical glitches occurred during the spacecraft's docking attempt. In light of these issues, NASA deemed it unsafe to bring them back using Boeing's vehicle. Musk pointed out that if SpaceX wasn't around, NASA might have had to ask Russia to help bring the astronauts home. That would have been a major setback. But how did things end up like this? To really understand, we need to rewind and look at what led up to these events. 10 years before the Starliner mess became news, NASA handed out contracts to Boeing and SpaceX. The goal was to enlist their help in transporting astronauts to the International Space Station. This move aimed to lessen America's reliance on Russia for launching astronauts into space. Boeing's plan involved using their spacecraft called the Starliner, which is also known as the CST-100. SpaceX would use its Crew Dragon spacecraft. Boeing landed a $4.2 billion contract, while SpaceX, which was seen as an underdog, received $2.6 billion. Even though they got less money, SpaceX has been nailing it since 2020. They have successfully launched 7 crewed missions to the International Space Station using their spacecraft. Boeing, on the other hand, well, it's been 0 successful crewed flights, and they've gone $1.5 billion over budget. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk a bit about the International Space Station. It is this huge lab floating in low Earth orbit, built and maintained by 5 major space agencies. This includes NASA, Roscosmos, ESA, JAXA, and the CSA. It's the largest thing humans have ever built in space. It serves as a giant science lab where astronauts perform experiments in microgravity and study the space environment. Now, back to Boeing, they thought the Starliner would be the perfect ride for astronauts heading to and from the space station. The spacecraft itself is made up of a reusable crew capsule and a disposable service module. It's bigger than SpaceX's Crew Dragon, but smaller than NASA's Orion capsule, and it can carry up to 7 people, although NASA plans to fly only 4 at a time. Moreover, it can stay docked to the ISS for up to 7 months. The Starliner launches on an Atlas V N-22 rocket from Cape Canaveral in Florida. But the Starliner's journey hasn't been smooth, far from it. From software bugs to parachute issues, it's been one setback after another. It was originally supposed to be ready to fly astronauts in 2017, but those plans have been delayed over and over again. Mismanagement, engineering problems, you name it.
One of the earliest signs of trouble came during a test flight in 2019, a rough start. Boeing launched its Starliner spaceship into space for the first time in December 2019. Now, the plan was for the vessel to dock with the International Space Station. However, it was solely a trial flight with no astronauts present, just some cargo and a crash test dummy named Rosie. The Starliner took off successfully on an Atlas V rocket built by United Launch Alliance. Everything seemed fine at first. About 15 minutes after taking off, the spaceship separated from the rocket. It floated in space, waiting to fire its engines to head towards the International Space Station. But when it was time to do this, nothing happened. Boeing quickly worked to regain control of Starliner. The team managed to fire its main engines and got the spaceship into what they called a stable orbit. The Starliner was safe for the moment. Everyone was holding their breath, trying to figure out what went wrong. Following this incident, NASA and Boeing officials gathered at a press conference at the launch site in Cape Canaveral, Florida. There was a mix of relief and disappointment in the air as they explained what they knew so far. NASA's former administrator, Jim Bridenstine, stepped up to share some of the initial findings. He said that a critical timing error caused the problem. Basically, the spaceship's internal clock was off, making the Starliner think it was farther along in its mission than it really was. This glitch led to a series of wrong maneuvers. The spaceship began doing things it wasn't supposed to be doing yet, wasting fuel and putting the mission at risk. This timing error wasn't something anyone had expected. The officials tried to sound optimistic, but it was clear that they were disappointed. As you can imagine, this problem wasn't just a minor setback. The teams had spent years planning every detail of the mission, and seeing things go wrong like this was tough. They had to rethink their next steps and figure out how to fix this major issue before trying another launch. It's strange to think that something as small as a timing mistake could derail a billion-dollar spacecraft, but that's space travel. Even the tiniest details matter. This mission was supposed to be a major step forward, a showcase of Boeing's ability. Instead, it became a lesson on just how easily things can go sideways when dealing with complex technology. But this wasn't the end of the Starliner trouble.
Due to the initial flight not going smoothly, Boeing had to tweak their plans. They revealed that the Starliner would have to conduct another unmanned test before being deemed fit to transport astronauts. This was a big deal. NASA stepped in and ordered an investigation which lasted 7 months. By the end of it, they found 80 things that Boeing needed to fix before Starliner could try again. While Boeing was tied up with repairs and investigations, SpaceX was making progress, completing crewed tests that Boeing hadn't even started. But Boeing's troubles weren't over yet. As they prepared for another uncrewed test, they aimed for a 2021 launch. Then, engineers discovered something alarming: more than a dozen corroded valves in the propulsion system. It was a mess. Boeing had to go back to the drawing board, running extensive rework and testing to sort out the problem. The launch was delayed again and was eventually pushed to May 2022. When Starliner finally launched for its second spaceflight, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, Boeing had finally gotten it right this time. The ship didn't encounter any major issues and managed to make it to the space station and back safely. It felt like a long-awaited victory after so many setbacks. Things were finally starting to move forward. By the next month, NASA announced plans for Starliner's first crewed flight. It would be a 2-person test with veteran astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams. This was a huge step for Boeing. But who exactly were these astronauts chosen for this high-stakes mission? Butch Wilmore was used to dealing with pressure. He had flown combat missions during the Gulf War in 1991 and had worked as a flight test instructor before becoming an astronaut in the year 2000. He first went to the International Space Station in 2009 aboard the shuttle Atlantis, where he delivered important spare parts. Then, in 2014, Wilmore spent 6 months on the station after being launched by a Russian Soyuz. On that mission, he did 4 spacewalks, proving his familiarity with the spacecraft. Sunita Williams made her mark as the first woman to take on the role of a test pilot for a new spacecraft. Before NASA, Williams had served in a Navy helicopter squadron overseas during the Gulf buildup. NASA picked her in 1998, and she jumped right into working with the International Space Station. Williams first visited the space station in 2006 aboard the shuttle Discovery, where she stayed for 6.5 months. Her mission was extended after hail damaged her return flight, forcing her to adapt to longer in space. She later returned to the space station as a commander. With these 2 experienced astronauts, Boeing had a strong team ready to tackle the Starliner. Wilmore and Williams had seen it all: combat missions, long stints in space, and challenging circumstances. They were prepared to take on the Starliner. But the spacecraft itself had its own challenges.
The hardware issues that had plagued the Starliner didn't just disappear. Just as Boeing was getting ready to conduct tests of its spacecraft with astronauts, new issues arose in the review process in 2023. It seemed like progress was being made only to be followed by setbacks. New complications led to additional delays, including the need for an extra drop test on a new parachute system. To make matters worse, Boeing had to swap out nearly a mile of tape used to insulate the spacecraft wiring after discovering its flammability. However, by the spring of 2024, it seemed like Boeing was on the path to overcoming its issues. They seemed to have dealt with the engineering problems that had held them back for so long. There was a sense of hope that the Starliner's troubled past was behind it. The spacecraft was all set and the astronauts were geared up. Everyone around the globe was eagerly observing to witness whether Boeing would successfully pull off the long-awaited mission. However, appearances can be deceiving. The road ahead was bound to be challenging, and the Starliner's series of problems was far from over.